All right, welcome everyone to Phoenix Book Club. This is week 6, chapter 7. Tonight on the call, we have some of our normal regular friends. I'll go first for once, since I always go last. I'm Mike Ries. I work at a company called MX in Utah. I mostly do backend development, mostly in Ruby right now, and been learning Erlang and Elixir for kind of on and off for several years, but spending a lot of time in Elixir in really the last 3 to 4 months. So I'm enjoying it and super excited for what we learned from Chapter 7. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. I'm Zach. I work with Mike at MX, also on the same team, doing Ruby stuff. Phoenix has just been a lot of fun to diversify my web knowledge. So that's what I'm interested in, and looking forward to using it for some side projects.
I'll go. I'm Dave Hackett. I do not work at MX. I work at Master Control. On time, and I've been messing around with Elixir for a few months now. I'm still reading Dave Thomas's book, Programming Elixir. Really fascinating book. For a nerd, I guess. And just loving Phoenix. Everything that I'm learning is just really cool. So I'm excited. I'm glad I'm part of this group.
All right, no one left to wait for, John.
It's more so just looking around. I'm Jon Carstens. I also work at MX, and I actually work in QA at MX, but I'm more interested in, what's around me and growing up my development as well. I've been really enticed and drawn into Phoenix and Elixir with the idea of model or chain sets. That's been a lot of my focus lately, is that idea of data control in the chain set as opposed to other areas or higher or lower levels of the process. So anyway, it's been super interesting. It's been very enticing, and excited to keep going on with it.
Awesome. All right, for follow-up items, the only question I had, I just wanted to throw this out to the group. After our last meetup, we talked quite a bit about plug, and it occurred to me, I was doing a little bit of work this week in a Ruby middleware stack, and it occurred to me that when you are doing kind of a middleware stack in Ruby, you get to touch that environment object kind of on the way up the chain, and then potentially on the way back out of the chain, you get another chance, since you have to explicitly call app or yield depending on the exact implementation of the middleware pattern you're using. But it just occurred to me that with plugs that you only ever see the connection on the way in. So I'm just wondering if that really leaves, is there anything that leaves on the table that's not really possible or not as easy to do with an architecture like plug? So the use case I'm thinking of is at work we have a system that does categorization, and we have a bunch of different layers in that categorization system that will attempt to categorize the incoming data using different sets of strategies. And a lot of those layers basically say like, oh, if my confidence in categorizing it is over this threshold, then I'll just go ahead and return early, otherwise I'll call up the stack. But there's a few layers that specifically don't vote on the way up. They wait for other people to vote, and on the way back out, if no one has been able to categorize it, then they apply their categorization with a low threshold. And so having the ability to kind of see the outcome of the other layers of the middleware stack gives it a chance to like throw in a last-ditch vote. So I'm wondering, like, is that a good pattern? I mean, it's a pattern that has worked well for us in that one use case, but maybe that's not a great pattern in terms of like general use cases, or maybe you could do that same thing with a one-directional pipeline. I'm not sure.
I think with that example, maybe because I'm more familiar with it, I think it's just more a matter of like, oh, I think the bigger concern is like I want something to do something on the way down and on the way up. I think that would be more difficult to implement in plug versus like just catching something just on the way up. Well, okay, well, that's easy in plug. I'll just throw that at the bottom and do all the stuff I want to do before it first. If I want to do something though, kind of like do this before and possibly do this after, depending on what's happened around me, that's where to me it seems like plug is a limitation. But maybe to get around that, you just instead of having one middleware thing that handles it on the way down and on the way up, I think just if you reorder your stuff properly, you could probably still get that same effect. It would just be split into two plugs at that point, like one at the beginning, and then you do your work, and then the stuff that you want to do on the way up, it's just going to be at the bottom of your plug. So I think you could get all of the same functionality you want. You just have to break it apart and think about your ordering maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, that seems like it would be the case that you'd have to split the responsibilities of those two responsibilities apart.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously you can accomplish everything in both of these two implementations, these two patterns. I'm just wondering if there's any, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I just wanted to throw out as an open question, like, is there any patterns or is there any cases that you know of where separating those things would make the code harder to read or harder to understand because they really go tightly together? I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It does seem like in most of the cases where I've seen that done, you could definitely have a clean line of separation between the responsibilities on the way in and the responsibilities on the way back out.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just thinking here. Like, I know specifically, I think some of the ones where like, oh, I have some string coming in and I want to do this on the way in and this other thing on the way out. If they're both sharing a lot of code, then it just makes it a little trickier in Phoenix and maybe a little harder to read. Like, it's a little more difficult to connect. Like, this plug is actually kind of does the same thing as this plug up here. How do you connect those two ideas together? So as far as readability as that goes, it could potentially be worse, or just like a little more indirection instead of just all in one file. But I don't know.
Yeah, because you can just like, oh, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, and this is also something I've been wanting to look into Ecto more just to learn more about it. And as kind of like hey, look at this thing that I learned about Ecto. Since the book starts in it, but then it's like, go to the documentation. But they talk about, I was reading just before the on, let me see if I can dig up where it is. Because they have on the documentation, they say that so they're talking specifically about the change set, and so I don't know like how, since it's not the connection necessarily going through. I mean, they're running. You're looking at the change set with Ecto, but they talk about how it's only looking at the changed fields when you're doing like validate. So maybe I could get my screen and you guys can see what I'm reading. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm looking here. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So you're looking at, they're talking about this change set method up here, and so after the call to cast, then they're doing these validate methods, and they validate only the changed fields. So if a field was not given as a parameter, then it just skips. It won't be validated at all. Like it just, so they say in the case, so this is your list of required parameters. So name and email are required, and this one's the optional one. And so if they just didn't give the age, then this validate inclusion just won't even execute. It just, from what I'm reading, it's just basically it'll be like a no-op. It won't even run anything on that, even though it's part of the pipeline. So I don't know if that would have any kind of, if there was something to learn from that. I just thought about it as you were talking about, like, oh, well, if it doesn't happen, kind of like that catch-all, like further down that pipeline, if you didn't get this categorized from these earlier operations, like if it didn't get categorized here at A, but then it goes down to B, and it still doesn't get categorized, but maybe those, I wonder if there's something that you could do to just basically no-op it down. I have no clue. It was interesting when I read that, and I thought the book mentioned that too. But just reading that Ecto documentation, I thought about, well, that's interesting. I wonder how they do that. And I don't know how that works, but I'd have to probably dig into the Ecto internals, which I did not have time for.
Yeah, as I think about the example that's kind of in the back of my head from work where we do this, I think the main reason that we wanted to touch the environment on the way up and down was because we're kind of relying on the fact that someone else in the stack is going to be manipulating or mutating that environment in some way, and so maybe in a world of functional programming, like where you don't really depend on mutation to happen, and actually you really don't want mutation to happen, maybe that's part of why it's just not very useful to organize it that way. But in any case, obviously, if anyone watching this has an example, comment or let us know, tweet at us, whatever, and I'll follow up with it. I'll just keep it in the back of my mind, and if I can think of any specific examples, I'll bring it up. But off the top of my head, for me right now, it's just a hypothetical. Like maybe this is leaving something on the table, but I honestly can't think of anything, and I've been trying for more than a day. So yeah, I guess we'll chalk that one up to maybe there's something to be learned there. All right, so I think that's it for follow-ups this week. Did anyone else have a follow-up that they wanted to bring up? Okay. So yeah, let's just talk about the chapter. Chapter 7. So this chapter covers a bunch of different stuff, actually. The chapter felt like it kind of wandered, like it starts, and maybe the focus of the chapter is really on dealing with relations between our data, and kind of how Ecto handles relations in data and how it really embraces the relational part of a relational database. But it ends up exploring that by going into a bunch of different things, like you end up generating another module, you deal with seeding the database, you add change set constraints, you worry about cascading deletes or cascading nulls, and then it finishes with a discussion on let it crash versus handling failures, which felt a little bit like kind of a broad set of topics. But I don't know, does anyone have a question or a place that they wanted to start on that chapter?
So I thought about I could remember the section. It was basically when he's like, "Oh, we and then it even gave a helpful message saying, if you wanted this to be an error instead, or get a tuple back, basically like an error tuple instead of the exception thrown." I thought that was really neat. I mean, I didn't quite wrap my head around it, but I thought it was good that, hey, if you call this other function instead, then you'll get an error tuple back, and then you can like pattern match on it and handle the error, which I thought was really, I thought it was an elegant way to either have the error or throw the exception still.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna the moment in the chapter when I had like the cat starry eyes emoji on my own face was basically when they talked about database constraints, and I think this was like my follow-up item that I talked about last week's call as well. But I'm gonna say it again because this is like manna from heaven for me. So at my current job and at my previous job, we ended up duplicating a whole bunch of things between um, having the application layer attempt to check for unique constraints, but we knew that it doesn't catch all of them because there's multiple threads happening at the same time, and also there's multiple copies of the server running at the same time. And they're not going to check with each other. That's extremely difficult to do in a normal threaded programming language. And so we would end up putting a unique constraint on the database as well as in the application. And if it happens to get caught in the application, then you get a good error message. If it happens to get caught by the database, then you throw an exception and you usually just like end up showing a 500 error to the user. But at least you haven't corrupted your database, and like, oh my gosh, that whole set of trade-offs is just so kind of frustrating. And the alternative to that I've seen some teams implement in similar languages like PHP and Ruby is that they will just put the constraints in the database, but then you end up with kind of rescuing exceptions at the application level, and you always have to comment those exception handlings to say, oh, I'm doing this because the uniqueness is actually guaranteed by the database, not by the application. And then you're back to like this is a readability issue, this is a maintainability issue that the team is kind of always tiptoeing around, and seeing it like I just love so much the idea that like, hey, we're going to define this at the application level, but when the library does the database migration for you, it's going to put the uniqueness constraint in the database, and it will gracefully handle that exception for you so that it looks and feels like it's an application level concern, which it is. Like in a lot of these cases, you really want your application to assert this. It's just not feasible for your application to do it. But it looks and feels like an application concern, but yet it behaves with the consistency of a database level constraint. And that is like a million. I am probably going to write a letter, which is just like a million heart stickers, and put it in the mail and send it to Jose Valim, and probably make one for Chris McCord and other people as well, because I just love that so much. That's like one of my favorite things I've found so far in the overall Elixir ecosystem, and it's like not even a selling point of Elixir. That's just like, oh yeah, we happen to do it this way, which is the perfect way and the way that makes developers so happy and amazed.
My favorite point along that flow of constraints all the way down to the error messages is in the chain set error messages. It's defined as beautiful error messages for the consumption of humans. And so going along your lines, like even when you're handling the error within the middle, it's designed so that us seeing it actually and easily can know what's going on.
I think this is another example of Elixir just has by far the better matching of any programming language that I've seen. It is fantastic, and I agree with you, Mike. I love that. I loved how they explained it as well for the constraints, where they're like, it used to be just handled all in the application, and we'll throw it all in the database. And so, like right now, we actually have a guy at my company that's like, hey, we could do everything as a stored procedure, and I thought, oh, I think no thank. I think I'll be sick for the next year. Like, no thank. I don't want that. But I think that this is feel like the way that Phoenix and Ecto, or the way that they do it, I feel like it strikes a really good balance where they say, hey, you can get that. I love that it's just you define it here and it'll get pushed to the database. Like we will migrate that foreign key constraint, that unique constraint. I love that. It'll get migrated in. It's there at the database level, safe and easy. But then also you get the option to say, well, give me a nice program-friendly tuple that I can match on, that I can handle an error when they try to do a username or whatever it is. But then also, I like that they pointed out, sometimes you want it to fail. You just want your application to just be like, I don't know what happened. Something really trying to really. But I don't think that you always want to err on that side. Always you want to help the user to get done what they want to do. But I love that they leave it open to say, but sometimes you just got to fail. And so I love that balance that they're trying to strike.
Yeah, I'll definitely. I would plus one that as well. There's times in the programming language where you have a good fallback. Like, oh, if this username is, if I hit the uniqueness constraint, then I should probably prompt the user. Like, maybe I can suggest some other usernames to this user that's trying to register right now. And if that's the case, then let me choose to get it done this way. But maybe I'm actually just consuming data from a feed. Like maybe if I was swallowing the fire hose of Twitter data or something like that. I mean, it's not like I'm gonna go push something back to Twitter to be like, you sent me the same tweet twice, bro. No, of course not. I can't do that. And so in that case, it's not my job to handle it, and it's probably better just to let that worker crash and not have a specific code path for it, because there's nothing I can really do to recover from it other than just get the next message. And that's exactly what supervision trees do for you, is and isolate the error, but don't actually code for the error. And kind of to your point, Dave, I think good application programmers really are focused on trying to give the user the right information at the right time, and helping them have a productive experience with whatever the tool is that we're building. And it feels in a lot of ways like the Elixir community is taking that same approach from a language design standpoint, and also from kind of the values that they ascribe to in their community, is that they're saying, hey, we want to make it as good of an experience as possible for the application developers who will be using these tools. And so we'll give them the choice and make it an easy choice for them to make whether or not they want this to return something that's easily pattern matched on, or just raise an exception because they don't want to have to do the extra pattern matching because there's nothing they can do with the other case. I'll give one more fanboy mini rant. I'll keep this one smaller, but I'll share my screen here for just a second for this one. So this was another case for me of just Ecto just basically doing the right thing. So during this chapter, you create a category model. You go back and add a belongs to category to the video model, and you also let's see, it's in priv repo migrations. Add category ID to video, and so you go in and you add this category ID, and at the time that you add it, you go ahead and just say, hey, this references the categories table, and the default behavior is to generate a Postgres schema that looks like this, where it's like, oh yeah, cool, I'll add a category ID, and I'll add a foreign key constraint, and I'm just like, yes, this is, in all of my experience building applications, the majority case, the convention that I would like to have is the database should try to enforce an integrity in that relationship, and it's very rarely the case that I don't care about the integrity of that relationship. And so I would much rather have the common case for my database interactive layer, or my library that I'm using to interact with the database. I'm much happier with the convention and the standard default answer to be, yes, we'll add a foreign key constraint for that at the same time that we're adding the column to your database. That to me is much preferred over having to explicitly opt into it, which is my experience in basically every other database library that I've ever used. All right, many rants, many fanboy rants here. Does anyone else have a question or comment that came up during this the chapter this week?
Yeah, I definitely found the most interesting part, at least for me on this chapter, was the way that we manipulated the user controller. Every single action is now going to have a new default parameter list, basically using the, where is that page? I just had it, here it is, like this def action thing, and I'm applying to my module like my new stuff. That was pretty different for me. I still don't know how I feel about it, because I'm like, on the one hand, it does make I have my user just right there, and I'm like, oh, obviously, I guess that's how they're just getting params anyways, so why not just add another field? Then on the other hand, I just kind of have like this, now I have my user controller that has like all of its functions have some definitions on what is expected, and then my other controllers by default don't like have different kind of conventions. So I don't know how I feel about that, but that was definitely it's cool that you can do that for sure. But yeah, so for me, I don't know how anybody else felt about that, but just that def action kind of, I don't know if that was like some sort of meta programming stuff going on redefining those actions on, or what exactly how that worked. I would like to dive more into that, but I don't know if anybody else had thoughts on that.
I can speak just a little bit to the technical detail of, so basically when in your controller, when you say use, at the top of your controller, you say use a Rumble web controller, and if you look at your web file, your web.ex file, inside of the def controller, you can see that it says use Phoenix controller, and so yes, you are basically importing a macro, or you're like pulling in a macro to your, when you define this module that is the video controller in this case, and the way that macros in Elixir have this ability that you can basically define, the macro will define default implementations of various different things, but if the user decides to implement any function that matches the name and arity of the method or of the function, then all of the defaults of the macro go away. And that's basically because, like, if you imagine like the way the pattern matching works, right? If the macro put a default implementation of the action function in this case, which basically just always dispatches to one of your other functions and sends it to two parameters. If you now define your own, does that one take precedence? Is that the first one in the list, or is that the last one in the list? You might want either one of those two things, and so what the macro system and Elixir system does is, like, it basically says, like, here's a bunch of the defaults, but at compile time, if I see that the user is actually defining this thing, then I'll just not put any of my own definitions into the module, and I'll let the user just totally handle it. So one place that this comes into play is if you're doing just gen server stuff in Elixir, and you say use gen server, it implements a bunch of the defaults where you like handle info, which is what gets called if you just ever receive some message that doesn't look like it's a gen server call or a gen server cast. And the default is to just basically take in that message but throw it away, just so that things don't accumulate in your message box and crash your VM because of running out of memory. So that's the default one, but if you ever implement your own handle info, you have to also implement that default case yourself to guard yourself against that, because the macro expansion won't know whether or not you wanted your implementation to be first in line or last in line in the pattern matching. So that's a little bit, at least from the technical perspective, what's going on. I'll definitely say that I felt a little bit odd about that one too. And to me, the tension was like, this is cool that I can customize this, but like, is everyone on my team, if I'm on a team of people maintaining some Phoenix app, now this one controller just looks really different than everything else, and is that going to throw people for a loop? Is it going to be like kind of, is this something I'm going to have to explain to each person on my team, like, as they come onto the team?
I kind of had those same thoughts. I also was wondering, like I guess as of right now, that def action is right there in the file, but could that be defined somewhere else where it's not as visible? And then you're like, well, what is happening here? Or where, people can do probably stupid things with it. So
Huh.
I don't know.
Like,
Maybe it's not possible, but like somehow this def action is going to show up if somebody wants to put that in the use Rumble web controller on that web file. I could define that def action there, and I guess it would show up in this file. And then I don't know like what to expect, and it's just even more hidden and more different.
yeah, I don't know if the macro system would let you try to pull in two different sets of macros that both try to define. Like, so I know the case of like, oh, if it defines a default, but then you define a matching or function signature, then it just throws away the one from the macro. I would imagine that if you try to pull in two different macros that both define the same, like a matching function signature, I would. My intuition is that like the compiler maybe throws that away, but I don't know. I'll write myself a note to try it this week. I think I don't know enough about it to try it while I'm on the call, like Ruby Solo did last week. But
Yeah,
I'll follow up and give it a try during the week.
yeah. I'd just be curious on that stuff. Maybe I'm just like, overthinking this, which is most likely.
All right. Anyone else have a comment or a question? Oh, by the way, hi Garrett. You're muted. Oh, maybe your audio is just not working?
Hardware muted?
All right. Not welcome to the call, Garrett. All right. Any
Follows
other?
fails.
Even join audio now, Garrett? Dang it. Nothing. I'm getting nothing.
I also was just, I wanted to ask which method you guys chose to implement for how you wanted to handle your delete stuff. Sorry, Garrett, you can't talk, so I'm talking.
What was that?
So in the book, it gives you like, oh, there's 3 options of how you want to handle when you, I think it's when you delete a category. It's like, I was just curious which one you guys decided to choose and kind of what your thought process was when choosing them. You guys know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about. I just don't want to be the one to answer again.
So I can give the answer of I didn't do it.
Okay.
Like I read it and I was like, oh, that's neat. That there's different options. I think it was to me, it was like another. You can decide. It's flexible. You can either do nothing and like it'll just fail, right? It'll just say, oh, you're violating a constraint, so you can't do that. Or you can delete everything else. So just whatever references it'll cascade those things. Or you can just say, well, I don't want to. I just want to delete this one thing and nullify everything else. Just put a nil in the reference for all the things that did reference my category. And so I think it was great that they're like, oh, here's these options that you have to be a little more flexible, decide what you want to do. But I was lazy to do it myself, so that's not bad.
I also did the like, oh, I just won't do anything option, which that's like basically the default, right? Is to just say like, don't cascade anything. What did I understand that right from the chapter?
I don't remember.
So I should look it up. But I thought that the default was just like we won't cascade anything, but it would just raise an exception because you were trying to violate the integrity of the foreign key constraint.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so I just left it as that because I was like, if I ever try to delete a category, I'd rather not accidentally delete like a bunch of people's videos, because I can see myself like forgetting about that in the moment that I go to delete a category, and so I'd rather just have the database tell me, you didn't say the magic word.
Am I working now?
Yes. Hey, Garrett.
Does it work?
Yeah,
Is my name backwards?
it's the right way around, and even has an emoji.
All right. Well, thank you, Safari, for working. Thank you, Chrome, for not. I just wanted to say, I think the way that they're setting those up, how you can just set those constraint methods to just provide a healthy error for when things do go wrong, I think that's awesome, because it's really saying, for me, when I'm like solving these problems, of saying like when should I raise an error, when should I like swallow the error. When I'm working in Rails, it's like case by case, but I kind of like being able to say the problem isn't how do I handle the error, or like do I raise an exception or something. It's just like when I do have an error, how do I want to handle it? And it's not like at the surface when I'm calling a save on something. It's really like at the database level when I have a specific constraint error over something else. I kind of like the granularity, and I like the composition that it provides. And that said, like not having used it, maybe I'll run into a case where it's like, eek, maybe this is a little bit too powerful for this, for my normal use cases. But like I was like very thumbs up to that, just as a different way of handling those errors.
Yeah, yeah, we someone else also picked that, but definitely worth picking again. But specifically to your point of like when do you want to do it and when not to do it, I really like that that is part of kind of the functional change set pipeline of events, and it gets passed down to your database when you call the repo, right? Because again, like maybe if this was like part of a data migration task that's running on the server, maybe you do just want it to totally explode because it means that you probably had a bug in your implementation of the data migration. But when it's a user interacting with the software, maybe you do want to actually handle that so that you can hint to the user to change one of their inputs or something like that. So yeah, I would definitely also plus one that from that perspective as well, just that not only giving you the choice, but giving you the choice at that point in the application means that you can tailor it to your different use cases.
So what I did is I do agree with that. But I'll answer my own question. I decided to nullify everything, and as I'm looking, I'm checking my Postgres database, and I think because I added that, I removed my foreign key constraint on it. So maybe I shouldn't have done that. But I guess that makes sense, because if you can have nil values, then your foreign key, you can't have a foreign key. So
Interesting.
to add that, you did have to update your migration file. It's not something in your model. It's in the migration where you specify that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about that because I didn't choose to cascade the nillify, but I do have nil values for category ID on some of my videos. I'm pretty sure that's true. Actually, let me start up my app and I'll try to make one that has a null.
Oh wait, I lied. I was
think
looking at the wrong
that's
page.
true, right? Didn't they say that categories were optional? So when we set up the video controller, it was optional to give a category? I can't remember. Maybe I'm wrong.
Let's see. Okay, I'm logged in. Go to manage videos. I make a new video. I just say holding up. but this is the only URL I can think of off the top of my head. I promise that's a funny URL and not an inappropriate URL, by the way. I'm just realizing that I make a lot of Jurassic Park references on this weekly chat of ours, even though I don't reference it basically any other time in my life. Yeah, so that looks like it made it with no category ID. I mean, I can check here. Select star from videos. So just at the database, here's my emojis in the database. That's awesome. But yeah, down here I can see that. So I have an ID, a URL, a title, description, user ID, but my category ID is blank. Yeah, so I can still have a null, even though I do have the foreign key constraint that my category ID must reference a categories.id.
Yeah, I just realized that I was looking at the wrong table in my database. That's why the foreign key didn't exist.
Okay.
So yeah, it's there. Mine's just different. Mine will just say on delete set null, like specifically on the database.
Sweet. Yeah, and I like that. I like the choice of saying like, let's not try to implement something at the application layer that's like, oh, we'll go query a bunch of stuff and look for cases where someone's using this and then try to manually set it to nil and hope there's no race conditions. Like, yeah, let the database do that stuff. Although I really wonder, I know that Ecto tries to support like a Mongo adapter and stuff. I have no idea. I'm assuming all these features just are like disabled in that adapter because I can't imagine how you would try to implement any of that stuff in Mongo. All right. Any other questions or comments from this chapter? All right. So +1 stuff. I'll show just one +1 thing that I found pretty cool this week. I'll actually share entire screen again. Videoception. So the main thing that I wanted to do this week is I was just again trying to get a little bit further into the querying language of Ecto. I implemented a feature so that my user show page now has this favorite category section, and it shows basically like, oh, this user has 2 sci-fi videos and 1 comedy video. Those must be their favorite categories, kind of ranked according to how many videos they have of each. And so the way I ended up, let's see, I'll start my app. And the way I ended up trying to kind of like figure out what the right way to do this in Ecto was, so I imported ecto.query, alias Rumble repo. Oh, dang. And then my user. And so I started off by saying like, oh, I'm just going to try this in the console from you in user. You can like just run that, and obviously get everything. And then I said, okay, join. Let's see, how do you do this? I think you say ecto.model asoc u videos, and then you can say something like select u.id. v.id. I mean, I'm just trying to select something here. That didn't work. All right, I'll just look at my code for it because I don't remember exactly how I did it. But what I do remember is that as I was trying to write this, it actually I was able to just kind of layer on one more join, one more where clause, add a group by clause, all those things. Like I was able to kind of just, in a couple of cases, just guess that an ecto function existed, and it came out okay. So I think my user controller on the show page, I just basically end up having this most used categories. So I made a function which puts together it builds up the Ecto query for me. This is the first time that I've tried to use the separate the Ecto query from where you access it in the repo. And it comes out okay. Like this function just takes in a user object, and you just say like, oh, match on user ID, join in. Oh, that's how you do the associations. Yeah, I just was calling this part wrong. But then you can just basically say like, oh, select the category name and how many rows matched it, and then you group by the category name and order by the count star descending. And so I just query that and then pass it down into the view right here, most used categories, and render it. And so I thought that was pretty cool. Like it went pretty smoothly as far as in my console I was just able to mess around until I had the query working right and it was returning the data that I expected. And then I was able to just like take that exact code and just stick it inside a function, a private function inside my controller. And then the separation of building up the query data object, I guess, or what do you call those? Data structure, like a query data structure in a functional way, and then just pass that to my repo. So that was pretty fun. That was my only +1 from this week. Did anyone else have any sort of +1 stuff that they did?
I said I was going to dig into Ecto this week because I really wanted to see how they were doing some things, but I didn't. So I'll do it for next week. My forever delayed +1.
I think we should take a vote on the call right now of what emoji Garrett will have to put on his name next week if he hasn't done it.
Well, I could also just use Chrome next week and have no emojis because the thing won't work. So, either, pick wisely. That's all I have to say.
I'm thinking gerbil. The gerbil emoji is what's going to have to go on there.
Sure.
All right. Let's wrap up the call then. We'll just go around the call and everyone just point out something that they learned this week. Probably related to tech, but technically whatever the heck you feel like. So maybe Zach will once again surprise us with his knowledge of sports balls.
If you want.
Anyone can go first, except for me.
I'll go. Instead of going last this time, I will go first. It's a very simple comment, but when we were talking about constraints, and especially unique constraint, and doing unique constraints within the chain set, it was very interesting that instead of validating on the spot, it stores the relevant information, and then it waits until it's time to render or put the error, and then the repository will convert that into a constraint, or convert that constraint into the error, the actual human readable error. So it, to me, seems like we can interject or use that time to do lots of other functions or validations or even through the pipeline to get things done without having to worry about creating an error on our error, or other situations like that. I thought that was pretty cool, not having to be right on the spot, but then still have all the valid information and just convert it when it needs it at the end.
Sure, I'll go next. I was just looking over the generated code and looking more into thinking of how am I going to write tests for the code that we've written and things like that. And my definite +1 that I'm pretty stoked about is this refute, which is the opposite of assert. So I really like that. Just really simple, but good job.
All right, third is a good place for me to go. The thing that I was stoked about this week is ElixirBot. So a couple weeks ago I picked the Nerves project, which is basically a project that lets you, it basically builds a super minimal Linux kernel, usually on the order of 20-ish megabytes for the entire image that you're going to burn to your SD card, and then you can run that on either the BeagleBone Black or Raspberry Pi. And there is there was a presentation that was given at Erlang Factory this year, and I'm just learning about this week, where someone used the Nerves project and wrote a bunch of Elixir code. And so they're using like a Wi-Fi dongle, they're using a camera, they're using a Raspberry Pi, and here on the GitHub page for it, he lists out like the exact parts that he did. He even has a bunch of like instructions for building the frame and putting in the electronics and how you build the SD card image. So this looked to me like when I was first looking into the Nerves project, it sounded so amazing, but I know very little about the internals of Linux, not enough to feel confident in terms of like, okay, well if I do need to use a Wi-Fi dongle, what extra Linux modules am I going to have to like specify in my Nerves configuration so that it builds with what it needs to in order to run? And I really didn't want to like just poke at that thing with a stick and try like burning 50 different SD card images until I got it right, because the feedback cycle on burning an SD card image and then trying to boot a Raspberry Pi is long enough that I don't feel like trying to do it 50 times. So it was really cool to me to find an awesome sample project that used several different kind of common elements to one of these kinds of projects, and obviously it will be very interesting and useful to me as I start to play around with Nerves. So I just wanted to give a big shout out, and that was written by FHUNLES on GitHub, and his name is apparently Frank Hunleth. So Frank, I owe you a cookie or beverage of your choice.
So I'll go ahead and so thing that I learned that I could do 2 exorcism exercises in less than an hour. That was pretty sweet. Not Elixir ones, sadly. They were Ruby. But I was pretty pleased with myself. I could even just get those. But Elixir did. I was reading in the Programming Elixir book, and there's like an in-depth section on strings and how double-quoted strings are, if you're going to use strings, basically the impression I got was use double-quoted strings, don't use single-quoted if you're trying to do string manipulation, because single-quoted strings are lists of bytes of binary data. So it's lists of binary data. I think maybe I'm misquoting it, but basically, like, you can iterate over it, and you're getting the character codes for each character in a list of characters. So a list of characters, I guess. But I thought that was neat. You have this different abstraction just between a double and a quoted string that you can have. It's a list, and you can treat it like a list, and you can go over it like a list, perform operations on it. It's enumerable. So that was really cool. Yeah, cool thing about Elixir.
Awesome. Now the pressure's on, Garrett.
Oh. So my thing is not super tangible. It's just kind of like the good fire in your bones kind of a thing. Mike this week gave a presentation at work about proposed change of how we can use Elixir for one of our real-time systems, and he may have said it already on here, but that just kind of got me really kind of fired up to think that of these cool things that we've been learning about, we can actually apply them to problems. And it was cooler for me to then say, oh yeah, this like Elixir is a really good fit for this one thing, and then it kind of got me thinking, well, what about some of these other things? What about some other problems that at MX we have, and I don't know. So, fire in my soul kind of a thing got me really excited for some potential Elixir, and maybe some of those things that Mike was talking about are going to get greenlit and hopefully released to production. So if we can get it there, then I think we can work on a couple of things. So for me this week, just feeling like Elixir at work is a possibility was a major thumbs up.
That's what I should have done for my +1. Why did I do counting video?
Too bad.
All right. Well, thanks everyone once again for being on the call. I appreciate all of you guys wasting your time this week so that I could waste some of my time and learn some more things. And thanks to everyone who watches this stuff and gives us any sort of feedback. We really appreciate it. We hope it's useful to people beyond just ourselves. But even if not, we're probably still going to do it and have fun doing it anyway. So that's it for this week, and we will see you guys all next week.
See you guys.
See ya.
See ya.